Welcome to the MS Gym Podcast. I'm your host, Jody Feltham, and today we're going to get away from the cold and travel to a land down under to speak with longtime MS Gym member Kerry. Learn about Kerry's rare diagnosis and how she manages it through diet and exercise. Kerry will also share with us some of her challenges in living with a chronic illness and how she has learned to focus on the things that matter most. Hello, MS Gym family. So glad you could join us for another podcast of the MS Gym. Today, we are traveling far away, and I have to say it was a little bit tricky to schedule this podcast because we're talking with longtime member Kerry, who is all the way from Australia. So, Kerry, thank you so much for joining with me today.
Oh, thanks, Jody. It's a pleasure to be here. I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you. And it's so nice. I always love hearing different accents. So glad that we can chat today. So, Kerry, you and I were chatting before briefly on email as we prepare for this podcast. And I know this is the MS Gym podcast, but there are many other conditions represented in the MS Gym membership. So, would you tell us a little bit about your medical condition?
Sure. Thanks, Jody. I have a rare muscle wasting disease. And when I was trying to get diagnosed, as happens with many people, I got a bit gaslighted. But when I eventually got my doctor to listen to me, she thought I might have MS, or in Australia, we call it motor neuron disease, ALS. But in fact, it took another probably 8 months of going through a sort of testing, and I was diagnosed with a condition called Inclusion Body Myositis. It's an interesting name. Everybody shortens it to IBM. It's like,
Mm.
you know, um, and it's called Inclusion Body Myositis because these protein bodies accumulate in the muscles and they basically stop the muscles from functioning, and the muscles actually atrophy, and they say to you, you can't regain them. So it's really rare. Um, it's depend because it is so rare, it's even difficult for them to say how many people have it, but
Mm.
it's like maybe somewhere between 10 and 50 people in a million. So
Wow.
down here, yeah, I live in Australia, so and on the west coast, far away from the east coast where all the big cities are. And so based on our population, there's less than 2,000 people in Australia that have this condition.
Okay. Now, how did you said that there's a differential diagnosis of MS or ALS. How did they go about diagnosing you with IBM then?
Yeah. So with IBM, a big part of the diagnosis is your clinical symptoms. So
Okay.
my first symptom actually was weekends. And then I started having difficulty going upstairs. And then I started falling. But over probably 5 or 6 years, my doctor, and at this point I was in my 50s. So I'm now 66. And at that point it was like, oh, you're overweight, you're menopausal, you probably got arthritis, it's your age. So, of course, when they tell you those things, do you go back if you haven't lost the weight and you haven't done the
No,
exercise?
yeah,
No, you just keep going. Okay. And this is where, like, the brain's amazing. And I love Trevor's neuroplasticity focus because, of course, you make all these adaptations without realizing.
absolutely.
So, it was eventually what took me back was I couldn't operate the clip to put my dog lead on with
Mm.
my hand. It was becoming really infuriating. And also, I realized I couldn't step up at all on like a step ladder. And I
Oh.
went back going, this is not just my age or arthritis. This has to be something else. So
Mhm.
then sent me to a neurologist. So it was my local GP, sent me to a neurologist who then, that took me 4 to 5 months to get in to see a neurologist here in Australia in the private system. And then he sent me for an EMG where they test what's happening with your muscles. And
Okay.
they did that in my legs. And that was really when actually the neurologist doing the testing couldn't tell me, but he was like, I think it's quite clear what you have based on your symptoms as well. Because with inclusion body myositis, it's in some ways very different to MS in that we don't get spasticity and we lose muscles and we lose our flexors in our limbs is one of the first things.
Okay.
So my ability to curl my hand, like you can see here, I can't curl my fingers. Right?
Okay.
And you have specific things. You lose your quadriceps, you lose your dorsiflexors. Part of the falling over is you trip over your own toes, you lose balance. So I had all the classic symptoms. And the next thing they would often do is a muscle biopsy, right? But um, at the time, I opted not to have the muscle biopsy. I had twins in their final year of high school, and my husband at the time was working away overseas, which is what he's done mostly. So I was single parenting,
Okay.
twins going through exams, etc. And I went, "Will you do anything different?" So that was the next thing. Was like, actually, there is no treatment.
Okay. Okay.
Mm,
Can they treat your symptoms?
sorry.
Can they treat your symptoms though? Like as opposed to like with
Yeah.
MS, you can be on a disease modifying therapy or you can have symptom treatment. But for IBM, there's no treatment whatsoever.
So that was the neurologist was like, it wasn't an area that he was particularly specialized in, but he was like, the only thing that has shown benefit is exercise. So I'm going to refer you to a physiotherapist for an exercise program, um, because what they try and do is help you to maintain the muscles you still have, because it has this, it sort of attacks specific skeletal muscles.
Okay.
Um, and then over time, it becomes more debilitating.
Okay.
So it was a case so I didn't have to make any decisions. Like within the MS community, I see people trying to make decisions what they're
Mhm.
going to use. I'm like, well, maybe that was a positive. I didn't have to decide what treatment. Yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting how you talk about the differences between them, but at the same time, there's a lot of overlap with MS symptoms. Like I think about so many of the posts that I read in the members only corner, the Facebook group for members. So many of the symptoms that you have, like weak hands, difficulty gripping, tripping,
Yeah.
falling, weakness, and the like so many of those things are an overlap. So how
Yeah.
do you,
You can see why the
oh, for
doctor thought
sure.
it might be MS.
And with
Yeah.
obviously MS is a much more common neurological, sickness than obviously
Yeah.
IBS. So how did you go about finding the MS, Jim?
Oh, well, actually, one of my children had had lots of health issues. And so I had already seen the power of early intervention with exercise to
Okay.
help, right? And also been introduced to dietary things and had got involved in like clean eating and getting rid of toxins in our home. And through doing that, I'd connected with a number of friends who had relatives with MS.
Okay.
And then through them and having conversations with them, it was like I'd heard about Dr. Terry Wahls.
Mm-hmm.
So went and I'd already bought her first book, Minding My Mitochondria,
Yeah.
because I was trying to help. I had this teenage daughter who at 17 still needed to have a really good diet to manage symptoms for her conditions, and but no longer necessarily believed what her mother said.
Of course.
So having an external person that I could go, but look and look at this research. And then so I joined her Facebook community, and that's where I heard about the MS Gym when
Okay.
Trevor was doing like the free YouTubes and had the free Facebook group. And this is all, like I was like by then diagnosed with IBM. I'd started doing exercises with the physio. There were some specific exercises that had been researched for IBM actually here in WA. Oh, so my background is I'm a researcher.
Okay.
So as soon as I got my diagnosis for IBM, of course, I went home and Googled
Mm-hmm.
and looked for research. And I found some papers that had been done here in Perth, actually, at the Neurological Institute for Research,
Okay.
where they'd actually taken cohorts of patients with IBM and put them on a home exercise program. and it outlined also like what they measured to track and everything. And so that involved a gym that had, bikes and equipment that you could measure all sorts of items, a dynamometer to measure your grip strength. So I went hunting then for a gym that could help me do that. So I was already doing the exercise. And I guess, like many people, when you have a chronic condition, it's different if you're doing rehab, and even the gym that I found was used to people who'd had a knee replacement or a hip replacement. They were attached to a hospital where you go and you do a program and you improve. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, with something like this, you don't. It's forever.
Yeah.
And they're not really set up to help people like that. So I'd started not being so consistent. And I was like, I need to find something else. And that's where I love Trevor's energy.
Mm.
So from having seen it in the Wahls Protocol Facebook group, I was like, okay, I'm going to look at this guy. And I was like, I just loved him.
Mhm.
And, you know, back in those early days, so that was 2017,
Mhm.
then also as it got going and, the Motivation Mondays, Misty's,
Misty moments. Yeah.
the Misty moments, I really needed that mentor and motivation input
Hmm.
to keep me doing things. Like that was how I found it. And then once I'd found it, and once he started the paid membership, I was like, oh, I just really have to do this. I was such incredible value for money compared to the, going and accessing the gyms in person and the therapy. So that was how it came about. It was actually through the Wahls protocol group.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Mm.
So, are you still part of, like, do you follow the Walls diets currently, or are
Oh,
you
okay. And
modified?
like, yeah. So, and I mean, the thing for me was because the Wahls protocol, because she wants you to exercise, that was, so for me, it made a huge difference. And I'd had that experience as a parent, seeing the difference that food could make to my daughter. We'd been through FODMAPs diet, GAPS diet, we'd done all these different things
Okay,
because she
yeah.
had learning and physical challenges.
Okay.
And I'm a researcher, so I loved the fact that Terry Wahls does the research and had done the interventionary research. So I started on the diet. Now, at that point, with IBM, with inclusion body myositis, it has a huge impact on fatigue. And now, like a decade later, they're actually saying we have abnormal mitochondrial processes.
Really?
I mean, they
Okay.
still don't have any medications, but there are trials going on. And so in at that time in my disease journey, I would have 2 to 3 days a week where I couldn't get out of bed due to the fatigue,
Okay.
right? Fortunately, by then, my children were old enough to be driving, so they were driving themselves to things.
Mhm.
Um, so I bought the Money My Mitochondria book. I went on, I think it was like level 2 of the diet. So I took out all gluten, dairy, added in all the vegetables, all the clean protein,
Absolutely.
and the bone broth. And
Okay.
actually, my kids were happy to support me. We were already doing pretty healthy food because of my
Yeah.
daughter.
Yeah.
So we all were doing half a cup of bone broth before breakfast.
Fair enough.
You know, breakfast was like a cooked breakfast. So I didn't have to do it alone, right? They were happy to go along. And you can tweak it so it's very much, you can do a barbecue and a big salad and you're just not using the usual dressings and things. And at that point, as well as the fatigue, I had really bad dysphagia.
Oh,
So I couldn't
trouble
swallow
swallowing. Yeah.
really huge. And at the end of the day, if I went to take, I don't know, what was I taking at night? Magnesium or fish oil or something, I couldn't swallow it. It would get stuck, right? So within 3 weeks, I could swallow those pills at night again.
Wow.
And my fatigue had just lifted. It was like I almost could not, I couldn't believe it.
Hmm.
And really, I don't think we had that terrible a diet before, but I was eating gluten and dairy and some processed foods before and everything. It wasn't terrible. And a couple of weeks after that, so I was like, well, this is interesting. But, a couple of weeks after, my sister had like a morning tea with scones and jam and cream and, all of that. And I allowed myself to indulge, and that is, the feedback was amazing. That night, I couldn't swallow again. So
Wow.
in those early days, that was really convincing. And I was like, this is amazing. And my daughter was, she was really into sport. She's the one with the health issues.
Okay.
And she was fencing and she was right into all the nutrition side and everything. And so she was happy to do it as well. So having that other person
Mm.
doing the big nutrition thing in your household was really helpful. And I was really fortunate that one of my friends down here is actually married to an American, and he comes from Illinois. And they were doing a holiday over there. And Terry Wahls in those days was running like 3-day seminars and retreats,
Mm-hmm.
and which you could just attend as a patient. But also, I decided to keep myself motivated. I wanted to do her certification to teach the Wahls protocol.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I enrolled in her course to be one of her coaches, and I traveled to America and went to the seminar and retreat. And
Okay.
then
That's quite an adventure for sure.
oh yeah, that was like the whole planes, trains, automobiles,
For sure.
My I had a family member in LA, so I flew over, took the train across to Iowa,
Okay.
and going to that, it's a bit like the community you have in the MS gym. So, but you're in person with hundreds of other people dealing with mostly MS and different things and having, choosing to make changes and investigate what might help them. So I became really committed, and um, I spent I went a couple of times actually. I was lucky to go a couple of times when it was in person
Oh,
pre-COVID. And so I'm still in the Wahls Protocol coaching group, but I have not done any coaching for the past year because last year for me was a big family event year. And I
okay.
have to manage my activities.
For sure.
Yeah, so I'm still a Wahls Protocol follower. And interestingly, for last year, when I went through and mapped when I had falls and downtimes, like I record my falls in my phone diary so I can go back and look at what else. It's when I go off,
Mm.
I I indulge in things that you wouldn't normally indulge in on the Wahls Protocol because I'm human.
Of course.
And it's like, and I go, this is when I fall over. This is when these things happen. So yeah, I'm still following the Wahls Protocol diet, but the lifestyle is like, yeah, doing the daily exercise. It's like, and that's where I'm still in the MS gym. So what, 6, 7 years, however long it's been, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, no, the free stuff started May 2017 and then the membership was December
Oh,
2017.
okay.
So it's been a long time now. So yeah,
And
this year, I guess this May will be what, like 8 years. So it's
wow,
amazing. So
that is amazing.
so that's incredible that you had you want your one daughter was doing the diet with you, so that helped motivate you. And then just tracking your own progress and some of your setbacks. Like that would be
Yes.
motivation in itself to stick to it. But like you
Oh,
said, we're all human, right? And we all do want
yes.
to indulge, right? And sometimes when we restrict so much, then sometimes it's hard when we get opportunities to have
Yeah.
a treat outside. Sometimes it's hard to hold back or not to overdo
Yeah,
it. So
definitely.
for sure.
And I do find the tracking for me helps. It wasn't enough though. So at times I would get really slack with the MS gym
Okay.
and you have setbacks, fractured an ankle, did this, did that. But I think being in the members community and being able to share about that was great. And I joined a buddy group because of that reason of like, in my own life, when I was first diagnosed, I had a close friend who was going through cancer,
Mm,
right? So, another close friend whose sister had MS. So there were a couple of people that understood what it's like to manage
hmm
a chronic disease. Um, but really, I didn't have a support group outside of that. You know
mm,
that, and I think that's been the big thing for me of being in the MS gym because myositis is, well, there's other forms of myositis, but IBM, it's rare. So we have a great patient community here,
mm,
but and we get together here once a quarter here in my state in Western Australia,
mm.
but there's only like 30 of us,
Okay.
and I often will talk to people about what I'm doing. I've tried to encourage people to join this gym, but you get a bit of flashback of like, but it's not the same, and if I post things on the patient groups, people, I sometimes feel quite attacked because they're like, but it's myositis, it's muscles, it's not MS, it's not neurological, like, so
Yeah.
sometimes you can encourage people and sometimes you just have to sit back and go, well, I've let them know it's there.
Yeah.
And I found one of the key things for me in the MS gym was the importance of the positivity, the
Mm,
things that people are trying to do. And so, in order to um, try and keep myself exercising, as my hands started to deteriorate more, I joined a buddy group. So I've been in that for quite some years, the Scribblers. I think it was called the Grinders and the Scribblers. And
okay.
I can only turn up at one particular time where we're not a large group. We're only three or four. But I think I've lost track of how many years I've been doing that with Michelle, who hosts it, and Kathy, hosts, but I don't make it to her one. And that has been amazing. Like
Mm,
I don't know, 3, 4 years. And that gave me that consistency of actually doing that sort of 3 times a week. I make it to that. And I joined another buddy group where there's a few of us in Australia. So we're
okay.
on the same timeline. We don't exercise together with that one, but it was like, let's keep in touch. And then I managed to meet up with one of those people. And, things change over time. So then um, I wasn't working when I was diagnosed because of what my kids were doing, but I
Mm,
went back to work in like 2019, um, part time. And up until then, I was being quite consistent with my exercise,
okay.
but then I let it fade away.
Mm,
Right. I was doing pretty well. I hadn't really thought about the additional stress. And I mean, my work, I loved my work. I was working at one of the universities, helping researchers in the medical field connect with patients who had diagnoses relevant to whatever research they were doing.
okay.
So it was that whole patient involvement.
Mm,
But I only did it for a year because my physiotherapist was the one that flagged with me. So every 6 to 12 months, I go back and I still do all the testing that I started doing back in 2015
yeah.
on my muscle strength. And you expect a certain level of degradation, but I'm staying above the norm,
Okay. That's
right?
great.
So in my house, I don't use any aids. Um, but when I go out, depending on what I'm doing, if I'm going and not having to hold the dog, I'll use trekking poles. But if I'm going with the dog currently, I'll use a wheelie walker,
All right.
right? And I have a light foldable electric wheelchair
Mm-hmm.
because both my kids were living away in different places, and if I wanted to go further. So, and I think some of that has also come from being in the MS gym community where you get to chat with people about what they're using and you get ideas. The trekking poles definitely came from Trevor. Otherwise, I'd just be using a cane.
I know that's one of the huge that was kind of Trevor's big thing was the trekking poles. I think that revolutionized so many things for so many
Oh,
people. So,
absolutely.
and in the members only corner, they talk a lot about energy conservation, right? And then not
Yes.
doing yourself in just to prove a point or
Yes.
for safety too, right? Like sometimes it's really important to use, a wheelie walker. Like maybe you can walk inside independently, but then in stressful situations, right? It's not safe. And
Yeah.
you were mentioning before that you've had a few falls, right? And obviously, whether it's MS or any condition, right, falling can really set
Yeah.
us. So it's important not to put ourselves at
Um,
risk in that way.
that's right. And I think that thing of the different environments, and I know Trevor talks about that too, because I definitely find, there are certain environments, whether it's the lighting or the pattern on the carpet or different external inputs that affect my ability to balance myself
Hmm.
and move quickly. So and last year, as I mentioned, was huge. So both my children were finishing their second degrees. We had graduations in other places. Like I had to, for my sons, it was on the other side of Australia, which is the same sort of width as the States. And and my daughter actually studies in Italy, so that was a
Oh,
30-hour
wow.
journey to get to hers. Yeah. And I looked at the year ahead, and this is the benefit of, I've worked with my physiotherapist a long time, and he had this great analogy, like Trevor, about being athletes.
Yeah.
So he was like, if you think of yourself as an athlete and you look at this, it's like you've got, a local competition, a national competition,
Ah,
then you're going to a regional competition and your Commonwealth Games, and then you're going to the Olympics.
absolutely.
So what are you going to change? And I mean, that was part of me stopping working, doing things differently, looking at, doing the Wahls protocol coaching, because it was like, actually, I need to change the whole focus of my life. And I started a buddy group doing Reconnect. And so there's just half a dozen of us in the group that meet. We meet Monday to Friday. For me, it's 6 a.m. So,
Oh,
and
wow.
there's
Okay.
two other people in Australia. One other is in my city, and the other one is half the way across the country. And
Oh,
then the other three are all in the States.
fair enough.
So, and I mean, I recognize, and we've had some conversations in the MOC that, it's tricky to do your core program together because you have all different needs. But,
Absolutely.
we adapt. And we were like, okay, but the consistency. So we've exercised Monday to Friday daily since May 2024.
Okay. Wow. That's phenomenal.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
phenomenal. So you were talking about really focusing the last year, really focusing on what your priorities are, and obviously being there for your kids' big events. What would you say might be another goal in the next few years for you? Like, what are you hoping to do, whether it's traveling or achieving something? What are you hoping to see?
Yeah. The next few years, so I have a couple of, I mean, one thing for me is staying able to visit my daughter in Italy. So she stayed working there once a year. I'd like to do that trip
Hmm.
each year. So to do that, I've got to try and keep my body and my health as well as possible. But another thing for me is doing a bit of reconnecting socially with friends and family, because I've found this huge focus, it's the same when you have MS as IBM, except with IBM we have to hunt for supports. There's
Mm.
no like our patient society is just all volunteer patients. There's no funding. There's
Okay.
no right. We can't sort of link into things that are already set up, which is
Right.
another reason I'm in the MS gym. So it takes a huge amount of time. So I'm hoping to gain some of that time back and put a bit more of an emphasis on socializing
Mm.
within what I'm able to do, and recognizing maybe it's going to be I have to like invite people over to my house every couple of months, because going out can be so challenging when you can't do stairs, you can't cope with different light, different sound, all those types of things. Um, and hopefully keep consistent with my exercise.
Mm.
And I plan to get back to doing a bit more coaching this year, which I haven't done for the past 15 months,
Okay.
so that I've got that additional. The thing I like about it is it means it's easier to stay up to date with the latest research of what's happening, even if it's not directly in my diagnosis
Hmm.
within that whole neurological, neuromuscular field.
Okay. So
Mm.
it sounds like you have many different passions and you are very giving of yourself, right? Wanting to be a coach and making even when your daughter was not well, like you were all in to help her. And it sounds like you want to provide more for your community too. And you are so willing to be adaptable. Like you said, you know, maybe people coming over to your house to help you, as opposed to so many people would say, well, going out is too stressful to me. Doing this, I can't do this. So then they just shut everything down. But you sound like
That's,
you've become so flexible so that you can do these.
yeah. I mean, it's understandable. And I've been in that space that you talk about of sort of having to just focus on yourself, really, probably for the last 2 years,
Hmm.
because I knew I had all these things coming up. So I think at times it has value to do that
Hmm.
and just really focus on self-care. And I've been lucky, I've had a couple of people that I've socialized with throughout that. But I think now I've sort of gone to this next level of going, okay, actually now I want to widen my social circle, and I'm doing that really for self-care and
Mm.
self-support and recognizing that's something I miss. Um, and, doing the coaching helps me as well because I'm getting those constant reminders of how do I look after myself.
Mm.
I try and do at least 3 self-care things every day. I
Oh,
mean, one
wow.
of those is walking my dog. Like for me, that's self-care because we get to walk in a nice environment.
Hmm.
And, I'd really like it if I can get back to walking without having to use the wheelie walker, but I'd rather be safe. Okay. It's
Absolutely.
always that thing of being safe. And then another thing for me is every night trying to do 3 gratitude things. I don't have to write them down, but just thinking before I go to sleep, what am I really grateful for? And and recognizing it's hard. Like my local physio, she gave me this really interesting analogy. When you have, a chronic condition, and she lives with one too, she said it's like being at the beach and trying to dig a hole in dry sand.
Hmm.
Like you can't stop. Whenever you stop, it starts to fill in again,
Okay, yeah.
right? So it's like trying to find a way to support yourself to keep going. Mm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I can't believe how quickly our time has gone,
I
Kerry.
know. I just
It's been so amazing talking with you. I really enjoy that
thanks,
you can
Jody.
tell that you are a researcher, just the way you articulate yourself and you speak. Like I'm learning so much from you and I really appreciate so much of what you said. And you know, you touched on that piece about gratitude and how important that is in our healing, right? To
Yeah.
look for the things to be grateful. And it's very hard to do at times, especially when you have falls or you have a really, you know, a really rough day or week or month. But it's so important and I'm glad that you have the, you know, the support of the MOC and hopefully other people around you too, because you know, we all
Yeah.
need each other. We can't do this alone. So
No, absolutely. And being able to go in the MOC and just plug into the different things. I love the fact that Trevor's back doing more lives, little chats.
mm.
It's like that really helps you, I think, when you're going through those downtimes. Mm.
Absolutely. And then you
Really.
can just search, you know,
Yeah.
whether it's your issue or just a symptom that you're having. And again, I always say that it's amazing that, you know, the MS gym, it's online, but it's international. You know, like you and I are speaking, we're 13 hours apart, but in the members only corner, there's always someone there. It doesn't matter what time of day it is in your
Well,
country, there's always
yeah.
someone there. So
I mean,
it's
the
such an
MS gym.
incredible.
Yeah, because of the MS gym now for me, it's been so transformational Monday to Friday to get up, put my exercise gear on, go in my TV room and meet up with these other 5 people
Hmm.
and exercise, and like we'll chat for a few minutes, then we do our program and then we'll have a chat afterwards. And like that just sets my day off so well. It's amazing.
Hmm. Wonderful. Wonderful. So
Mm.
thank you so much, Kerry, for meeting with me
Thanks, Jody.
and for teaching me so many things. And I know that the people that are hearing the podcast are going to learn things from you. And obviously, it's good to have more exposure and learn about other conditions as well. So thank you for your
Yeah.
time, and I hope that you
Oh,
have
you're very
a great
welcome.
day. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the MS Gym podcast. You can find more about the MS Gym on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and at themsgym.com.